Hi, and welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus. So a bunch of people have asked me, how do you become a programmer? Now, I am actually an engineer. I went to school for 5.5 years, got 2 engineering degrees, electrical engineering. But from the age of about 6 or 7, I was programming in BASIC. Well, I was programming. I believe the first piece of software I wrote was, we had just watched the movie War Games, I think it was, and so I wrote a little basic program on our TI-99 4A home computer. Yes, I'm old. And it basically just printed, do you want to play a game? And then you were supposed to type in global thermonuclear war. Fortunately, my mother came because I was so very proud of this very simple. It didn't do anything after that. It just asked you a question, printed it on the screen, and then you're supposed to type a certain answer, and it would check this answer, and then of course something would happen. I never got any further than that because I didn't know what to do, and fortunately, my mom came over and she saw and she said, "Well, I don't think that's a good thing to be." That she was just fit to be tied because I don't think I even knew how to spell global thermonuclear war. So anyway, that was kind of my introduction to programming. Then I decided to go into engineering, and of course I thought I wanted to design things. When I got my first job, actually before I got my first job, I was an intern at Caterpillar, and I did some things with JavaScript. Was brand spanking new. The company had an internal network, their intranet, accessible only, of course, to Caterpillar employees, and they wanted me because the internet, the web was Web 1.0. The internet was in its infancy, and of course, I was creating websites, in my spare time in my dorm room and playing with it and stuff. And so the organization that I worked for, that I was an intern for at CAT, they said, "Well, hey, can you make us a fancy intranet web page for our group, for the division or whatever it was?" So I did, and of course I used JavaScript, and this was like, it was like brand new and amazing because you could hover over a button, and using JavaScript, the button would like change color and font, and this was like amazing, right? So then I got my first actual job when I got out of graduate school, and I was supposed to be a design engineer, and I discovered very quickly that design engineer means that someone else, there's like some higher up group that actually does the fun part of like choosing the chips you're going to use. Like, what do you want your gizmo to do? It's a board, and you've got inputs and outputs, and someone else kind of does all the hard work of the fun work, actually, of deciding what to use, and then I'm supposed to just kind of put it together and do some kind of like analog circuit analysis and stuff. And I wasn't very good at it, honestly, but I could have become good at it, but I just found it so boring that they decided they didn't want me, and I decided that I didn't want them, and so I got shuffled over into the test engineering department, and that was pretty cool because I got to write C code to actually test racks of equipment and do all kinds of fun stuff. And of course, it was programming, which I enjoyed. Then, fast forward over the years, I have changed jobs, and I have basically become a full-fledged web developer. I run like 5 different servers. All that entails configuring web servers. I've written entire applications for, multilingual websites. I've created like a progressive web app that's like a chat application powered by JavaScript and Node.js. You can look at my LinkedIn profile and see all the stuff I've done. But anyway, programming is sort of like my thing, and I kind of fell into it, not necessarily due to formal education. So, of course, naturally, I'm kind of mostly self-taught, and so many people have been asking me, like, well, how do you become a coder? How do you learn to code? And so I thought I would do a short video kind of explaining what I think are the 3 most important things that you need to know in order to become a coder. Maybe the 3 most important things you need to do in order to become an effective coder. So the first thing is you need to actually be curious. You need to be a little bit nuts. And if you're the kind of person who you just sort of go like, oh, Windows 10 doesn't work, and then you like start crying and stamping your feet and banging on your keyboard and you grab your screen and throw it out the window, you're not going to be a programmer. Because programming is very much about, I have this problem, I need to solve it, or I need to have, I need to make an application, an Android application, a website, an interactive website that does all kinds of stuff. How do I do that? And of course you don't know. So you may be like, well, what's the programming language I'm going to use? Oh, do I use like WordPress and write stuff in PHP? Do I, make it like, Node? Do I use React? Do I use something like jQuery, or do I write just plain vanilla JavaScript? Or the first step is to figure out how you're going to solve the problem. Then of course the second step is, do you actually know how to program in that language? And if you don't, well, obviously you need to learn how. Not surprisingly. So now, when I was an undergraduate, as I said, the internet was kind of a newfangled thing, so we had to learn HTML and CSS, and for some odd reason they had us learn Java. I took a Java programming course. Now, I absolutely hate Java. My apologies to Java fans, but I cannot stand it. It's like, to me, it's a ridiculous programming language. Unfortunately, they didn't actually teach us JavaScript, which nowadays would be much more handy because, as most people know, JavaScript is basically the web programming language that powers everything from Google Maps to Google Docs to all the fancy features of all your interactive websites, and pretty much everything is JavaScript powered. So I had to take these kind of introductory web programming courses, and naturally that meant it was sort of boring. You can go online and you can find courses that teach you how to program in some particular language, whatever language interests you, and it will be like, this is a variable, this is a string, this is an integer, this is an array, this is a hash, this is an object. Now we're going to add an element to the array. Now we're going to remove an element from the array. Now we're going, and on it goes. And of course, it's extremely boring. And that's kind of part of the problem. In my opinion, the best way to learn how to program is, first of all, you have to be curious, and you have to be a little dedicated and a little nuts. The best way to learn is to actually, once you have your problem, you just go, okay, now I'm going to learn. And okay, you may start off with some sort of like guide on like Udemy or something, and some kind of introductory course. There's all kinds of free stuff available on the internet. You just do a search, go through a couple tutorials, and of course you'll have the basics, the very basics. So the most important thing is that yes, you're going to use some of these basic courses, but the way you're really going to learn is if you have some problem to solve, and then you set about trying to learn how to program stuff to do whatever needs to be done to solve that problem. So say I'm going to make an interactive website that allows people to enter data, and it stores it in a database, and then there's a form where you can view the records, you can edit them, you can shoot some people some emails or something, whatever it is. That will actually make you realize what you don't know. And of course, you'll do Google searches, for example, and you'll find other people's chunks of code, and you look at their chunks of code, and you have to figure out what they're doing, which probably means you have to look up even more stuff, and on it goes. So in the beginning, it's a little bit crazy, but what actually keeps you going is this kind of hopefully insatiable curiosity and this drive and dedication to actually get there. That's much more useful, because if you're simply learning about these are data structures, this is an array, you're not actually doing anything useful with it. You have to actually do something useful with it. I remember when I was an undergraduate learning electrical engineering stuff, and we took a class called Signals and Systems, and it was all this obscure math, and I went, what in the name of God is this for? And it was so boring. And it wasn't until I got to grad school when I started doing, information theory and wireless systems and, communications protocols. At that time it was TDMA and CDMA for cell phone networks. And it was all of a sudden that stuff that I had learned, that basic stuff in the Signals and Systems course, it was here's what you actually do with it. But it took all the way until I got to grad school before I could actually do something useful with it. And when I saw the actual application of it, then it was like my eyes lit up and the bulb above my head just, exploded practically. And I went, oh my God. And all that stuff that I never quite understood as an undergrad, suddenly it all fell into place. And I did my master's thesis on synchronization and detection in CDMA receivers. And I love that stuff. It's fascinating. So the point is, you have to be excited about it, because it's the excitement that's going to drive you to suffer through all the research you're going to need to do, digging through other people's code, figuring out what happens, what the heck does that command do. Without like a goal in place, you're never going to get there, because you're just going to get bored. You can go through as many online tutorials as you want. You just have to do something that you're excited about, that you really want to do, and then you will actually stick with it. And also you will learn faster, because each little step that you take, you're going to get more and more excited, because you're going to get closer and closer to your goal. And before you know it, you're done, and you go, holy crap, I just programmed something, and look, it works. Well, then you have to support it and fix everything that's wrong with it, because no doubt there'll be bugs in it, but that comes later. So that's the first thing. Now the second thing is, don't always do things the way that everyone tells you to do them. You will want to do, X, Y, or Z, and so you'll do a search and you'll find out that everyone is telling you this is how you're supposed to do it. This is the proper way of doing it. And so you'll do it that way. And then, of course, later a problem will crop up and you'll go, well, I did it the way that I was told to do it, and this thing I'm doing is not working. So what's the deal? And of course, you won't think that, oh, it's because I did everything the way other people told me, because that's what everyone does. That's proper coding, right? That's what I'm supposed to do. How come it's not working? Don't accept anything that anyone says, no matter, I don't care if they're like, chief product engineer at Google, blah, blah, blah. I don't care if they invented the programming language that you're using. Do not assume that what they said is the best way of doing things. It may not be the best way of doing things. It may not be the best way of doing things for your specific application. So you always have to ask questions. And kind of linked to that is the third item, which is never assume that you can't learn something because it's too far above you. So let's say like a Ruby on Rails app. It does whatever, you write it, and anytime you have a question about something, you go and you look on, the issue tracker, whatever, their blog, whatever, and these core Rails programmers are writing this stuff, and you see a chunk of code and you have no idea what it's doing, and you're going, geez, this guy's super smart, he really knows what he's doing, blah, blah, blah. Then one day you discover that you have a problem, because let's say you have a multilingual website, and you have different databases for each language because you concluded, well, that was the optimal way of doing it. And one thing leads to another. There's another update to Rails. You apply the update and boom, suddenly your multi-language database selector isn't working. And that leads you to discover that actually Active Record is horribly, horribly written. Well, specifically for a multi-language application, it's not very well written. It doesn't work, let's say. So then you decide, as I did, to write your own. And mine is called Store. Instead of Active Record, it's STOR, which of course stands for Scotty's Terrific Object Record. This is another thing. It's extremely important that you actually give it a name that is probably a little bit ridiculous, but that also excites you. It's good to, like, if you're going to create something, make a mock-up of what you want your website to look like. Make it all pretty with buttons, and use like Paint.net or Photoshop or whatever, and make a mock-up of it. And, give it some kind of name, and sort of imagine a little bit like what this thing is that you're going to create, because that will get you excited about it. And you kind of have something physical from the get-go before you do anything. And you'll be like, yes, this is the thing I'm going to create. And then you're kind of more excited about it. That's just a little aside. Anyway, so I wrote a substitute for Active Record because of this problem with, multi-database, blah, blah, blah. And what I discovered when I did that is I started obviously having to dig into the Active Record source code, which before I had said like, whoa, these are like core Rails programmers. I'm not smart enough to do this. Here I had a problem. I was confronted with this insoluble issue, and it was like, well, I better just, there were a few other problems that I was having with Active Record, but Nothing too big, but I decided like, okay, let me dig in and see the core of Active Record. What is it actually doing? And what I discovered is that I don't care if you're a core Rails programmer or you're the founder of the programming language or whatever. Human beings are flawed, and so we write flawed code. So even the smartest programmer out there writes flawed code, and not horribly flawed, not awfully broken, but very often you'll look at the source code that previously you thought was like way over your head, and you'll go, wait, why did they do that? And so of course you'll research it, and then you'll discover like, hang on a minute, that's like super inefficient. Why did they do it that way? And sometimes there's a good reason for it, but sometimes it's actually a bug, or it's actually a compromise that, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes you can find these answers on the issue tracker for whatever language you're using. In any case, I actually ended up writing an entire replacement for Active Record. And just as I finished it, a new version of Rails came out and they said, hey, we've finally done multi-database Rails perfectly. And I went like, right, now that I've actually expended all this energy to make my own version, and so on and so forth. Anyway, in the end, I did all kinds of benchmarks, and it turns out that in the end, my Active Record store is actually faster and more efficient than even the new Rails one. So I went, oh, okay, well, I'll just keep using mine. And in that process, I learned a lot, and my confidence level increased. And okay, I'm not the best programmer in the world, but it started the little wheels turning in my head, where it's like I didn't think I was at the level, at high enough of a level, and it turned out that maybe actually I was a little bit higher, or I became higher than I thought I could be. So another example is jQuery. I love programming in JavaScript. It's my favorite programming language, and I was using it was a website, and I was using Prototype and Scriptaculous. Those of you who've done JavaScript programming may remember that from the olden days. And for various reasons, I couldn't totally get rid of it. There was issues with obtrusive versus unobtrusive JavaScript, and of course you're supposed to do unobtrusive, but I had reasons for sticking with half and half, actually. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. And so I said, well, I'm going to switch to jQuery. I can't use Prototype anymore. So I almost switched, and I went, hang on a minute, this is crazy. Like, what? There were some problems. I won't go into details, but then a friend of mine said, well, hey, check out this thing called Balalaika, and it's this tiny little chunk of code, which I spent like days staring at it, trying to figure it out. And once I did, I went, Jesus, like, that caused me anyway to look into the core of jQuery. And of course, jQuery is this famous JavaScript library that lets you do interactive everything, buttons and, interactive everything, AJAX calls, whatever. It's extremely popular. And I always assume that, well, my JavaScript programming level is nowhere near that of the creators of jQuery, so I never looked at the source code. This time I actually did look at it, and what I discovered was that I could take Balalaika and write my own JavaScript library, which I call PikaJS, which is actually available on GitHub. I'll put a link down in the description. My Active Record substitute store, that's proprietary, and I can't let you see that one, but PikaJS is my own creation, and it is on GitHub. It's in the public domain, open source. And I think currently jQuery 3.60 is 87.4 kilobytes minified, and PikaJS that I wrote is 9.28 kilobytes, I think. It's like 9.4 times smaller than jQuery. And of course, then the question is why? And the answer is that when I looked at the source code of jQuery, what I discovered is they're kind of doing a lot of things for you. So like if you grab onto an element of the DOM and you want to like to on-hover, do this, blah, 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 they actually kind of create this object and attach all this other stuff to it, so that later, if you actually happen to call some other command, all their jQuery wonderfulness is going to handle everything for you. And when I made PikaJS, I said, well, no, I'm not going to do that. Because if you're developing some complicated application in JavaScript, you have all this information in your head. You have the whole structure. You have what you want to happen when you click buttons. So you've got it all in your head anyway. So you may as well actually do things more efficiently. And that's exactly what Pika actually does, is it uses built-in browser functionality, and instead of putting these kind of like bloated wrappers on it, it kind of keeps everything simple. Because at the end of the day, jQuery is usually using core browser functionality and basically just kind of padding it a little bit for you and making it a little bit easier to use. But there's another way of making it easier to use, which is what I did, that not only uses way less memory, it's way more efficient, it's faster. I benchmarked the wazoo out of absolutely every single line of code I wrote and did comparisons between jQuery and Pika, and I went like, Jesus, I just made a jQuery substitute that's over 9 times smaller and way faster, and it does almost everything that jQuery does. And of course, no one cares. Well, I don't know, because GitHub doesn't tell me how many people have actually downloaded it, but the point is, like, at some point, you're going to need to actually dig into other people's source code and never assume that what they did was perfect because they're better than you and blah, blah, blah. Obviously, it will take you some time to get there, but the thing is, if you always do what other people have done, or if you always use someone else's framework to do things, you're never actually going to really create something totally new. If you want to create like the new world famous social network or whatever comes after, say, Facebook, if you're doing what everybody else did, you're going to get what they always got. You have to sort of think outside the box, and part of that is just going, hang on a minute, like, do these people actually know what they're doing? And of course, you may think like, well, who the heck am I to think that I'm smarter than those people? And that's irrelevant. Like, you look at it and you are curious and determined and dedicated, and so you plow forward, and most likely you'll discover that a lot of it is good code, and other bits could be done better, and that will actually help give you ideas for new things you can do, how you can do things better, and then you can program it and share it with the world, and then you'll be a better programmer. So the point is that, we think that we have to like go to school and get an education and then go to a job, and then you're going to, end up doing paperwork for the rest of your life and not actually really coding anything. And it's like there's this structure, and if you want to actually get somewhere, not even with programming, like with anything, like it's always good to sort of think outside the box. And how can you do that when you're always following the rules? Well, I'm not supposed to write the code like this, I'm supposed to write it like that. There are good reasons for that, but there are also good reasons to not do it that way. One of my favorite things that I tell people all the time is, they'll say like, hey, I'm doing this and it's not working. And I'm saying, oh yeah, you can't do that, you should do this. And they're like, no, everybody told me not to do that because of this, this, and this. And I'd say, yeah, I know, but here's why you should do it. And then they'll go, whoa, because, I'm aware of why I'm supposed to do it, but like, I just don't care, because maybe for my particular application, it's better to do it this other way. And that kind of creativity and open-mindedness and, kind of let it be free-flowing. And finally, I should mention that I did another video on how to work harder, not smarter. There's also an article I wrote on that, which I'll link down in the description. And watch that video and read that article, because that will help you to avoid frustration. Because yes, you will start out and you will get frustrated. That's why you need to have your creative goal in mind. Preferably you have some kind of mock-up that you can turn to and look at and go like, yes, I'm going to do this. And it'll kind of help motivate you. But working harder, working like, well, I'm working 40 hours a week and I'm not getting anywhere, so I should work 80 hours a week. No, that's completely wrong. And you can watch that video. I'll put links to everything in the description, as I said. So that would probably be number 4, is work harder, work smarter, not harder. And if you do all that, well, then you'll be a coder. And actually, you could probably use most of that in other areas of your life and be successful at whatever the heck you want to do. So, right, that's about it. For more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.